If you are working out of your garage or in a small shop such as mine, there's a reasons why you might want to start investigating harvesting and drying your own lumber. I mean, lumber mills, they're kind of catering for the bigger shops, the furniture makers, the millwright shops. So they carry not only species but dimensions that's more based towards them. I don't need big 8-foot long boards or giant slabs to make the kind of stuff I sell. And I like to kind of cater to native trees in my area. It's kind of a marketing pitch. And a lot of times, that's just not the kind of stuff that's available. Plus, the dimensions I use in a lot of my stuff is much bigger than what a lumber mill is going to sell, because it takes a lot of skill to dry stuff above 12 and 16/4 inches. And a lot of times, I like 6 and 8 inch thick pieces of lumber. Plus, it's cheaper this way. I mean, you save a lot of money. Most of this wood you see in my drying rack right now was pretty much free to me. I just had to put a little labor into it. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. How to turn free wood into something that's useful to you. All it takes is a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of planning, and a little bit of patience. As most of y'all know, I do art markets for the majority of my income, and I do a lot of wood turning, making bowls, boxes, vases, that kind of stuff, mirrors. I also do some flat work, like small boxes and cases. Basically, I make stuff that's easy to pack up, to take to art markets, and it's not inconvenient for a customer to take it away. A chair would be kind of cumbersome to walk around an art market with or to transport to it. But I want you to think about this. You're not going to buy blanks like this from a lumber mill. And if you could, it would be outrageously expensive. I mean, this one right here, I did the math earlier, it represents over 11 board feet of wood. At $7 or $8 a board feet for this species, that's kind of pricey, and that would just kill all profit I could get from a lot of this material. Which is why I have to harvest my own wood in order to just be competitive and to get the kind of stuff I need. Plus the fact that you look at how you balance a grain on your lumber. Lumber mills, they will do a little bit of it, but their main concern is getting quarter sawn, rift sawn, plain sawn boards. They are not worried about centering the grain inside a board. They're not worried about the cathedrals and stuff like that. So even just getting the kind of material that's going to make my product the best it could be means I'm not going to find it at a lumber mill. And if you're making little boxes and stuff, like right here, I got a nice piece of spalted pecan. For most people, lumber mills, this is trash. This would be on their burn pile because it's modeled up and it might not be consistent for an entire board. But I'm not concerned with the entire board. I'm going to probably make a nice little box top on this one, and I'll use another piece of that same tree to make the sides, part of that tree that wasn't as modeled. So I might have an entire pecan box, but I control the looks of it and still keeping it natural without adding dyes or anything like that. Plus the fact that I really can't say this is all local lumber. I can tell people it was locally grown and locally made. These are native species to my area of the country. I can't say that one. Even if I go buy a pecan board from my lumber mill, it might have come from Alabama or Oklahoma or something like that, somewhere else, not just this area. And that kind of stuff is important to me because not only is it supporting my local economy, but it's a great marketing pitch. It allows me to build value. I can actually tell people where this tree grew. It grew on 4th Street down in San Marcos or San Antonio Street in Austin. And people have a sense of history and community. It just builds value. You just can't do that if you're buying from a lumber mill. Now, I can already tell what kind of comments are going to be somebody's typing in right now. There's no trees in my area. I can't just go get free wood. And I'm telling you, trees fall down all the time. You want a free tree? Wait till after a storm. Something's going to fall down in the neighborhood. Just go say, hey, can I chop this up for you and take away the trunk? Sure, leave it on the curb. The city will get the rest of it. Or if you're friends with an arborist, most arborists have a hard time getting rid of the trees. The city dumps don't really want to take it, or they charge them a lot of money. If You are friends with the arborists, they can tell you, hey, we're taking down a red maple next week. If you want, come and take the trunk and we'll just grind up the canopy. That would be a blessing to them, and you can get some great material. If you do that one, I do suggest you return a bowl or something from that tree to that person. Architectural firms, they're always clearing out lots. Hey, just give a heads up before you're going to cut something down. Maybe I can go out and pick a tree to chop down and process up. Tell you what, I'll return you 3 or 4 bowls for that, and you can give it to the property owner after their house is built as a housewarming gift. That's a great way to do it. Craigslist. People are always having trees fall down in their backyard. They put in a little notice, come take it away. The city's going to charge me $600 to do it. You can have it for free. What I'm trying to say is, if you're not too picky about the species, I restrict myself to native hardwoods in my area, you're going to have access to lumber. You just need to be able to jump when the opportunities open up. I mean, most of human civilization did develop around treed areas. Some of y'all might be in the desert. Hey, y'all chose to live there. But most of us have trees available. And those of y'all that are in the desert, hey, people plant ornamentals in their gardens all the time, their yards all the time. Those things die. And if you have that take what you can get mentality, you're going to get the joy of being able to work with a whole bunch of different species. If you're just going to a lumber mill, you're kind of restricted, and a lot of people just get stuff for the color. Walnut for the dark colors, cherries for the reds, maples for the light colors, that kind of stuff. But if you're working with whatever you find, you get the privilege of working with mesquite, pear, apple, pecan, hackberry. I even have some poplar in here. Nice walnuts. You get both black and regular walnut in my area. I mean, just China berry. That was a kind of an interesting one to work with. I get box elder in this area. We don't have much maple here, but box elder is pretty close. Just a wide variety so that you can bring a lot more to your product. And you can even mix them in with more traditional woods like the cherries, which we do have 1 or 2 species down here in Texas. Now, I did a video a while back on tree butchery where I showed you all the different parts of a tree that you could use in woodworking, and you can use the entire tree. But my preference, because I'm getting a lot of this stuff for free, is I really only want about 2 feet above the ground and up to the second branch. And if that branch is really, really big, I might use that specifically for bowls, but for nothing else. And I prefer trees that grew fairly straight up and down, because for a lot of my work, I do like the kind of plain wood. I want to be able to balance a grain, but I don't want a lot of imperfections in it, knots, wave, that kind of stuff. I want my design to be the key feature. And you can do that one with branch wood and stuff like that. And if I'm wanting to decorate it, I might specifically take that spot in the tree right there, which is going to have a lot of figure from that flame, from the ligaments that are holding the tree together and preventing it from splitting apart. That might be as fancy as I get in balancing that in the bottom of a bowl. But the type of trees in your area kind of dictate the tools you're going to want to use. As a wood turner, I kind of think you need 3 main tools. You need your lathe and all the tough stuff that goes with that one. You also need a bandsaw. Those kind of go hand in hand. And if you want to save money, you need to invest in a good chainsaw. Go ahead and get a pro chainsaw. Even if you're only going to use it for once or twice a month, in the long term, it will last you a good long time and you'll be less frustrated with it. Nothing worse than going out and working for 2-3 hours with your chainsaw and then having it sputter out on you, die, and you kind of waste the entire day, especially if you drove 3 or 4 hours to get to a place. You want something that's going to run all day long when you do need it. And spending a few $100 extra bucks to do that one is well worth it. But the size of chainsaw you want is also kind of critical. The chainsaw I use the most is just a 50cc, and it has a 20-inch bar. And that 20-inch bar is big enough to make it a little bit past the width of the largest of trees that I'm able to process. And that's all I really need, because my lathe can only turn a 16-inch bowl. So if I can cut my blanks up into cut across 20 inches, but cut them down to about 20 inches so I have a little bit of waste on each end. I can then split those into my bowl blanks with that same chainsaw. I don't have to make multiple cuts. Now when I'm doing that one, the general idea is if you have your log, even in the lumber mill stuff, you want to get rid of the pith, because that's going to be the part that starts the cracking, that starts all the damage, and frankly that's the worthless part of the wood. So I will generally make 2 cuts right there, trying to balance the grain as best I can, even ones. So if the pith is off center, I might adjust those cuts so that the grain will be balanced. And then I will cut that pith out. And that basically gives me 2 halves and then 2 blanks. A lot of these sections I either turn into my shaker 20-minute bowls, or they go up in the rack to dry for a few years for me to make boxes and stuff like that. Because that's nice quarter sawn grain there. Perfect, stable, great wood. Not the kind of stuff you're going to find in a lumber mill very often, especially in that thickness. And why do I like that thickness? Because I can resaw that one and get all the grain going all the way around the box and make sure I get all the parts from the same spot in the same tree, so the colors are going to be the same. Again, added quality. And from there, it's all a matter of drying it. Controlling how the water comes out of that log so that the end product is something you can actually use. Now getting that water out, drying, it's just going to take time. But you as a person doing the drying, you've got to control how that water is coming out of the wood. Because if it comes out too fast, your wood's going to be totally trashed. And when I talk about this, there are basically 2 kinds of water in wood. And I'm going to dramatically oversimplify it. If you want, I'm going to bring it down to the elementary level. If you want a middle school level, I'll put a link down below to a short PDF document from Oregon State University that's really, really good. But if you want even more, I mean, people go to college to learn all this kind of stuff. And the guys that run the really good mills take it to the nth level. We're talking elementary knowledge of what I'm talking about right now. And in wood, you basically have 2 kinds of water. You have what they call free water and bound water. The free water is a water that travels from the roots to the leaves, up and down, comes down, brings the nutrients, takes the nutrients up. And it's running up and down those straws that we all use as an analogy to describe wood fibers. It's not the water in the cells. That water that's inside the cells, that's part of even the microfibrous structure or within the cell itself, that's kind of sealed in. And there's even some chemical bonding happening between the oxygen and the hydrogen and the elements in the cells themselves that really locks it in. Now, the free water represents the majority of a tree's weight. In fact, a standing tree is probably half its weight is just water. And what's really cool is if you've ever seen lumber mills or those old lumber movies, they used to stack trees up like a teepee when they first cut them, and below that it was just flooding water out. Because the free water, it'll come out with gravity. It comes out actually pretty quickly. Within a week or 2, you can drop the weight of a tree by 25-30% as you get rid of that water. In fact, there's one time I brought a tree in here and I didn't stand it on end. I just kind of rolled it into the shop. And when I came out the next day, I really did think I had a pipe burst or something like that, because my entire shop had a thin layer of water. It was just the water flowing out of that pecan. But the problem is, if that water flows out too fast, then the water bound in these cells will want to evaporate out of those cells. See, the tree kind of forms a balance between the free water and the bound water, and that's what keeps it at a certain moisture content that allows it to live. That bound water controls all the cells, the living parts and stuff like that. And if there's no water on the outside, it will slowly migrate out. And if it migrates out too fast, it's that something has to replace the vapor and water that was in that cell. And that's what causes the shrinkage in wood. It's the bound water, not the free water. You can have as much free water come out. It's not going to change the shape of the wood, because basically that was just in the tubes, the cells, the straws. That's not going to change its shape. But as the water leaves those cells, they do change. And if you get the water leaving too fast from the end grain, because all the airflow and the vapors are coming out here, that's where your cracking starts. So the first thing I do after I process the tree, almost that very same day, is I will put something called anchor seal. And you can use a paint or something like that, but something to plug up those holes for the free water to block its exit. I want that free water to stay in there. I don't want it to come out the tubes too fast. I actually want it to come out of the face grain because it comes out a lot slower and a lot easier. And obviously the water is going to come out of the outside of the wood quicker than the inside of the wood, but it's slow enough that the difference between the moisture content from the outside to the dead center isn't so radical that it's going to rip those cells apart as they change shape, causing our cracks. It's the same thing when I turn a bowl blank. When I'm turning a rough bowl blank, I basically turn it very even all the way around, and I coat all the end grain with that waxy material so that the moisture slows down how it's coming out so the bowl won't crack. It will still warp. I mean, this one was done about 3 months ago and it is radically warped, but it hasn't warped so quickly that it's cracked on me. And in case you're wondering, I do have a couple videos on turning bowl blanks. One's called The Roughing Life. Then I did another one of going from a tree to a bowl, a finished bowl, in a single day. But I talk about the drying process along the way. Now, if you are wanting the water to evaporate out of the face grain, because we've got this plugged up on the end grain, we have a problem. Look at that stack right there. That is never going to dry because there's no air movement around there. That's why lumber mills will sticker the boards, giving you maybe a 1/2 inch or a 5/8 inch gap so the air can flow over it so the water can leave it. If I were to leave these sitting right like this, more than likely they would just mildew and rot because the water is going to stay in there, and water acting on dead wood rots it. In drying the wood, one of the reasons why I like my shelf is because I put all different shaped stuff in there. And when I stack it, you notice I leave these angles, these gaps, because it's only touching on that point. So air can move it around. Now, this section right here was spread out all over my rack. I just recently condensed it all so I could have some open shelves to put that bow dart in there, which I'm going to show you a different way I do those in a second. But when they were more spread out, air could move around and geckos could get in and out. Even these larger quarter rounds, I would put them up like that and let them dry on my shelves. Most of this stuff right here has been on my shelf for 2 or 3 years now, and it's ready for me to start making boxes and stuff out of. But there's some items that you don't have to have 100% dry. Bowls, for instance, do they really matter if they warp a little bit? Or how about these mallets I was talking about earlier? Bow dart is one of the hardest woods I know when it is completely dry. But a mallet like this doesn't have to be perfectly dry to be useful. In fact, this one that I've been using for I think 3 or 4 years now was bone green when I turned it. I coated it in beeswax to control its drying a little bit. And it's been perfectly fine for me. It dented a little bit because it was still wet, but once it dried fully, rock hard. These that I'm going to be producing for the mallets right there, I want them to dry the majority of the way. Now, this right here would take, well, the general rule of thumb is start out with 1 inch, start out with 1.5 years, and then for every inch, add another year. So that right there, if I wanted this to air dry, it would probably take 5 or 6 years for it to dry. I want to reduce that. I already know that it is going to be a cylinder, so I'm going to turn these all round. And by doing that one, I leave less room, less distance for the water to migrate out of the board to dry out. These corners add a lot of time. But as long as I can get the outside of the wood fairly dry enough so it's not denting, these will be ready to rock and roll in 6 months to a year instead of those 5 or 6 years. And that's something you gain control of when you're drying your own lumber. You can set the moisture content. I do know a lot of chair makers, they like to have a really wet seat that's still going to contract a little bit, and really dry spindles that might even expand a little bit. So when you seat the mortise and tenon socket of something like a Windsor chair, that seat will actually shrink down on those spindles and really lock it all together. You can't do that one if you're buying your lumber for a Windsor chair from a lumber mill. So real quickly, let me turn these down to 5-inch rounds and show you the advantage of storing them that way on something like your drying rack or underneath your workbench or just in the corner of your garage. Now before I start processing that stack of lumber I had dedicated for mallets, that represented about 200 board feet of lumber. And I probably had another 100 board feet from that tree of square stuff that I don't really know what I'm going to do with it yet, so I'm going to leave it square and just kind of randomize its stacking order so that I can get air movement. But because I knew these were going to be cylinders, doing it this way, I mean, you're only going to have 2 or 3, maybe 4 contact points. The rest of it is space for air to move. Plus the fact that it doesn't have as far for the central water to move out. So it should dry a lot quicker in a round form than in a square form. Now, I did say I want to start using this in 4 to 6 months. I also have a way in my small shop to speed that up a little bit. I have a small kiln that I made out of an old refrigerator that somebody was giving away because it didn't work anymore. Because basically this is just a big ice box. And I'll put a link down below to a video on how I did that one. And it just uses a series of different wattage light bulbs to heat up this interior area. And what happens is every 2 to 3 months I will take all this stuff out, put it in my rack, and let it acclimate it, because this is now really dry and I want it to acclimate to my shop's moisture. I'll load it back up. I'll put the date right here, and then that tells me every 2 to 3 months swap that stuff out. And you'd be surprised at how much lumber you can get processed through. When I'm in the bowl turning mode, a lot of times I will turn the bowl, I'll put it on my drying rack, because you want that free water to get out of it before you put it in the kiln. Even the big lumber mills, a lot of times they will air dry wood for a year or so before they kiln dry. Because kiln dry will really ramp up the temperature and get that stuff out of there really quickly. And a lot of people don't like kiln dried wood because they say it feels crunchy. Well, that's basically because the water inside the cells has expanded so rapidly that it's cracked those cells, and then they dry out even more. Maintaining that cell structure is what gives it a silky smooth feel when you're working with it with hand tools. Plus it's generally a little bit wetter. Anyways, this kiln right here will allow me to work with wood a little bit quicker. And once again, all it is light bulbs, and I have a temperature gauge in back, And I have this little thing right here that when I really want to ramp up the temperature high towards the end, I'll kind of plug up this one exhaust port because air comes in on bottom and comes out through the top. So allows me to control it. And really in the summertime, this thing will get probably 20 to 30 degrees higher than the outside temperature, and sometimes in this shop it gets up to 105, 110. So that gets me into the realm where real wood processors dry their wood at. I mean, it's actually pretty good for low budget. I think I want to say I spent 10-15 bucks on the little light bulb setup and just finding a broken freezer on Craigslist. Now I understand for most people woodworking isn't as serious as I'm taking right here. A over purchase of material costs isn't going to destroy your monthly income because it is just a hobby. But the advantages of being able to experiment with different species of wood that might not be available to you, or using local resources, or being able to save money on your materials so you can spend more money on your tools, there are a lot of advantages to experimenting with drying your own lumber. And you don't have to have a giant drying rack. Maybe just a corner under your bench, or if you're a turner, hey, maybe rough turn your bowls right when you get them and stick them up in your attic. Your attic is pretty much a kiln. I mean, in the summertime it gets up way up there in temperature wise, and it will vent all the moisture and stuff like that coming out of the wood. It's great there. Plus the fact you'll probably forget about it and leave it up there for a few years, so it'll be bone dry whenever you do put it on the lathe, and you can really turn fine details. Or if you're a box maker, hey, somebody's cutting down a tree in your neighborhood. They generally cut up the rounds into sizes that you can pick up and put in the back of the truck. So ask them, hey, can I grab a few pieces? If you don't have a bandsaw, you can actually just use splitting wedges to divide it up into sections and then store that in your attic or under your bench. I mean, that's actually how chair makers like Peter Follensby get a lot of their styles and stuff like that for their chairs. They just let them sit around their shop for 6 months to a year, and then they're ready to use. Drying wood is another niche of this craft that even if you get the most rudimentary skills on it, cut it, seal the ends, let it dry for 6 months or so, then stick it in a refrigerator kiln for another 2 to 3 months and jack up that temperature so that it's ready to rock and roll. The thicker it is, the longer it's going to take to dry, the slower you need to slow down that evaporation process within the wood so it doesn't crack. I mean, just very basic rules can open up your world to a lot more opportunities. If you enjoyed this video, please do me a favor. Like, favorite, subscribe, do all those social medias. Tell your friends, hey, maybe go to my website. A lot of the woodwork I've been talking about right now will be available for sale on that website. And in 6 months to a year, maybe you'll see some of those mallets pop back up. And look down below in the description, because I will leave links to a lot of the videos that I've kind of referenced in this, including how I built that rack right there. Really inexpensive, really strong. I want you to remember one last thing, that it is always worth the effort to learn, create stuff, and share it with others. Y'all be safe and have fun.